I was just finishing my morning check of the property when I heard the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel. My eyes snapped up to see a shiny Lexus creeping up the driveway. A lawyer. Great. He stepped out, leather folder in hand, looking like he was about to deliver bad news. And boy was he. "This is a claim for $3.2 million," he said. "The HOA holds you responsible for the flood damage to Clear River Meadows." I blinked. Flood damage. My land? I didn't own the creek. I didn't control the river. But somehow, they were pointing the finger at me. And then he dropped the bombshell. "They're coming for you.
They're coming for you.
And they won't stop until you pay." But what they didn't know, I wasn't backing down. Karen Winters didn't need much to stir up a storm. A couple of signs, a newspaper article, and a few well-placed words, and the gears of her HOA machine would grind to life, all aimed at one thing: control. She wasn't just the president of the Clear River Meadows Homeowners Association, she was the puppet master. A woman who thrived on power and manipulating everyone around her. Karen had learned early how to weaponize anything at her disposal, and this time, she had me in her sights. I'd known Karen long enough to know when she was behind something. She didn't need much of a reason, just a personal vendetta, a little agenda, and a way to twist the truth until it fit her narrative. When Ash Creek swelled over its banks and flooded Clear River Meadows, Karen saw her opportunity. Instead of acknowledging the natural disaster, she quickly shifted blame to me, even though I had nothing to do with the flooding. She accused me of negligence, claiming that my failure to maintain proper flood controls on my property was the cause of their damage. And Karen wasn't shy about using her position to spread that message. Within hours, she had massive red vinyl banners strung up across the HOA's entryway: "Pay for the flood, Mr. Hogard." Her next move, a full-page article in the Valley Ledger published right next to a human interest story about a rescued barn owl, where Karen, in her most refined tone, accused me of everything from failing to manage water flow to neglecting my moral responsibility to the neighborhood. What Karen didn't know was that I had never owned the river. I wasn't even responsible for its flow. The state managed the creek, and I had a mere easement for cattle watering and minor maintenance. But that didn't matter to Karen. She had created her own reality, and in it I was the villain. She'd been at this for years, using her charm and position to manipulate the HOA board, twist public opinion, and isolate anyone who crossed her. Now, with the flood as her weapon, she was pushing her narrative hard, and I was the bullseye. But Karen made one mistake: she underestimated me. I'd lived by Ash Creek my whole damn life. That river had been winding its way through the land for centuries long, before Clear River Meadows was ever a thought in anyone's head. My family respected that creek. We never tried to control it, never thought we could. We just worked beside it, respected its power, and lived in harmony with the land. That's how it had been for generations. But when Clear River Meadows came in with their overpriced homes and their cookie-cutter suburban ideas, that harmony began to crack. I wasn't the type to get tangled in their petty complaints, at least not at first. Sure, they had tried to sue me 5 years ago over noise complaints, claiming my John Deere tractor was polluting their precious peace and quiet. They didn't like the idea of hearing anything that wasn't the hum of a Starbucks blender or the whisper of wind through plastic shrubs. But in the end, the court sided with me. Their bylaws didn't apply to my land. I figured that was the end of it. I thought they'd leave me alone, let me work my farm in peace. But as the years went on, I realized I was wrong. They never forgot. That spring, when the rains started to roll in, I wasn't concerned. I'd seen it before. The creek swelled, the banks threatened to overflow, but it had always receded in the past. The trick was to stay ahead of it, to listen to the land. So I checked the banks every morning, reinforced the dam by the orchard, and made sure the cattle didn't wander into the lowland pasture near the south fence. Sure, it got a little soggy, but nothing unusual. But then, the rains didn't stop. And one Saturday morning, it happened. The storm of storms rolled in overnight. The creek tore through the valley like a freight train, a force of nature none of us could have predicted. But here's the thing, it didn't touch my land. No, the creek veered south, smashing into Clear River Meadows. Their fancy entrance gate collapsed, houses flooded, and roads washed away. It was ugly, but not my problem. I knew that. Still, Karen Winters and her HOA couldn't let it go. 3 days later, I was out mending a latch on the east corral when I heard the familiar crunch of tires on gravel. I looked up, squinting into the sun, and saw him, the lawyer. Mr. Hogard's friendly legal representative, wearing his gray suit like a uniform, clutching a leather folder that probably cost more than my tractor. He walked up looking like a man who didn't know what kind of storm he was about to step into. "Mr. Hogard?" he asked, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I'm here on behalf of the Clear River Meadows Homeowners Association. I've been asked to deliver a formal notice of claim. I wiped my hands on a rag and walked over my gut already twisting. I was about to hear something that would make my blood boil. It started small, the way most things like this do. A sign here, a whispered word there. The HOA didn't waste any time, and soon enough, Clear River Meadows was plastered with red vinyl banners. Pay for the flood, Mr. Hogard. Each sign more obnoxious than the last, strung across their fancy entrance like they were announcing some kind of prize fight. I couldn't escape it. Even when I drove into town for feed, there they were hanging in the wind like an accusation. And as much as I tried to ignore them, I couldn't. Every time I passed those signs, every time I saw a new one pop up, I could feel the weight of the community turning against me. I was the villain in Karen's narrative now. Then came the article. Right there on page 2 of the Valley Ledger, Karen had penned a full column under the headline, "When Nature Strikes, Responsibility Matters." The words were smooth and calculated, but the message was clear. I was to blame for everything. The flood, my fault. The destruction, my negligence. Karen had already framed me, and the town was starting to listen. It wasn't just the signs or the article anymore. They were stepping onto my land, and I didn't like it. I'd barely gotten back to the East Corral when I noticed someone watching me. A car parked along the road just outside my fence, a black sedan with tinted windows. I walked up cautious. Whoever it was didn't move. It felt like they were waiting for me to make the first move, like they had some right to be there. As I got closer, the car drove off too fast, too deliberate. The next day, another letter showed up, this time from the HOA directly. A formality, a threat. The words on the page were dry, but the meaning was clear. If I didn't settle, they'd take me to court. No more pretending this was about the flood. It was about control. I wasn't just fighting Karen anymore. I was fighting the entire damn system she had built around her. And they were coming for me 1 inch at a time. It escalated quickly after that. The first thing I noticed was the damage to my fence. The post by the north side had been smashed in like someone had driven a vehicle right through it. At first, I thought it was just a bad accident. But then, the tire tracks were gone, and nothing about it seemed accidental. The fence had been taken down deliberately. Then came the mailbox destroyed, just smashed to bits. No note, no explanation. I'd seen vandalism before, but this felt different. This was personal. It wasn't long before my surveillance cameras went down. The footage was gone, erased, like it never happened. Someone had hacked into my system, removed every trace. I knew who it was. Karen had orchestrated the whole thing, and now she was getting more brazen. But it wasn't just about my land anymore. The community was growing more hostile. I went to the feed store and overheard a conversation between two neighbors. They weren't talking to me, but their words were loud enough to catch my ear. I heard Hogard's gonna pay for the flood. It's his fault after all. I didn't just have a fight on my hands. I had a full-scale war coming. It wasn't long before the sheriff showed up. I'd just finished a long day of work when I saw his truck roll up to the house. A big guy in a uniform walking toward me with a clipboard in hand. He didn't even say hello. "Mr. Hogard, we've received a complaint," he started. "Apparently, there's been a violation of state flood control regulations on your property." My stomach sank. I already knew what this was about. It wasn't about me violating anything. This was the HOA pulling strings, using their influence to get the sheriff involved in their smear campaign. "I'm not responsible for Ash Creek," I told him, holding up the easement paperwork. "I don't own the creek. This is a natural floodplain. You're wasting your time." He didn't argue. He just took the paperwork, made a few notes, and left. But that wasn't the end. Karen's smear campaign had just gone up a notch, and now it had the weight of the law behind it. It all came crashing down the day I walked out to the East Corral and saw it. My tractor was gone. Not just the tractor, my tools, my equipment, even the spare parts I kept in the shed. Gone. That was it. The moment everything shifted. They had crossed a line. I knew Karen was behind it, but it was no longer just about intimidation. It was about breaking me. They thought they could push me until I folded, until I gave in. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. I spent the rest of the night with Julian on the phone making plans. It wasn't just about defending myself anymore. I was going to expose them. Every lie, every manipulation, every dirty trick they'd pulled, it was all going to come to light. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. I wasn't going to wait for them to come to me. I was going to take the fight straight to Karen Winters. It was the day we'd all been waiting for, the court hearing. Tension hung in the air like a storm about to break. I walked into the courthouse with my boots on the ground and a clean shirt, nothing fancy, nothing to make them think I was trying too hard. I wasn't there for show. I was there for justice. Karen, on the other hand, looked like she was ready to win a prize. She strolled in with her lawyers, dressed like she was going to a cocktail party, while the rest of the HOA board followed, her eyes narrowed, like wolves circling their prey. The moment the judge, Melanie Groves, called the room to order, Karen started her performance. She sat tall, her lips tight, ready to spin her version of the story, painting me as the villain in front of everyone. But as her lawyers presented their case, I could see the cracks forming. The stories weren't adding up. I'd been waiting for this moment for the right time to reveal the truth. I had everything I needed: the documents, the reports, the witnesses, and Julian. He was ready to tear their case apart. The room fell silent as Julian rose to speak. "Your Honor," he began, "let me show you the truth." Julian laid out the facts one after another so precisely that even Karen couldn't ignore them. He began with the most damning evidence: the state's classification of Ash Creek. The river wasn't my property, not by a long shot. The easement I held didn't give me the right to control the water flow. Then came the damning paperwork. Julian handed over the hydrologist's report from Mara Simons, proving that the flood was exacerbated by Clear River Meadows' own alterations to the landscape. The HOA had made changes to the creek's flow without permits, narrowing the channel and cutting into the wetland buffer. The room was growing tense. The once confident HOA board members were shifting in their seats, exchanging uneasy glances. And that's when Julian dropped the bomb, a document showing the HOA had canceled a shoreline reinforcement contract just months before the flood. Karen had personally signed off on it, prioritizing a landscaping project over flood control. The crowd murmured, the weight of the truth sinking in. Karen's smug smile started to fade. Karen's defenses began to crumble like a sandcastle in a storm. Her lawyer tried to pivot, but Julian was relentless. Every point they raised, every weak argument they tried to make, Julian tore apart with facts, documents, and evidence. It was like watching someone slowly suffocate under the weight of their own lies. Then came the audio. Julian played the recording of one of Karen's board meetings, the one where she casually dismissed concerns about the floodplain, saying, "If we make it through spring without a problem, no one will care about the river. It's just optics. We need that money for the landscaping project." The moment her voice echoed through the courtroom, you could feel the atmosphere change. Even Karen couldn't hide the shock on her face. The whispers started, people from the HOA board members who'd once been loyal to her, now looking at her like they'd just seen a ghost. The judge didn't let the moment pass. "Miss Winters," she said, "I advise you to remain silent unless spoken to." Karen shifted in her seat, her face pale, realizing the full extent of her exposure. The moment had arrived. There was no coming back from this. The truth had come to light, and Karen was no longer in control. The courtroom was still buzzing with tension when Judge Groves issued her ruling. It wasn't just the legal victory that filled the room with relief, it was the feeling that justice had finally been served. Karen Winters had manipulated the system, tried to destroy me, but now she was exposed. I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders as I walked out of the courthouse. There was no victory dance, no moment of grand triumph. It was quiet, the kind of peace that settles after a long storm. Outside, the first person to approach me was Tom Delaney, my old friend from Clear River Meadows. He'd been watching from the back of the room, a hesitant smile on his face. "You did good, Daniel," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "We didn't know about Karen, I mean. We didn't know what she was really doing." "I know," I replied, shaking my head. "I didn't want it to be like this. But someone had to stop her. And just like that, things started to change. Neighbors who'd once looked at me like I was the villain started to see the truth. The signs came down. The whispers stopped. People weren't afraid to shake my hand again. The community that had once been divided now started to heal. It wasn't instant, but the shift was undeniable. Karen didn't take the ruling well. She didn't just lose the case. She lost everything. By the end of the week, the HOA board had held an emergency meeting. The result: Karen was officially removed from her position as president, and the board voted to dissolve her reign over the HOA. Her influence crumbled faster than I could have ever imagined. But it didn't stop there. The judge awarded us damages for defamation, harassment, and malicious prosecution, $950,000. Most of it was for reputational harm, the rest for the legal fees we had to rack up fighting Karen's lies. As for the HOA, they were required to undergo an independent financial audit, and Karen was let go from her job at the county legal office due to a conflict of interest. The blowback was swift and unforgiving. The same people who had once tried to bury me with their lies were now scrambling to keep their heads above water. It was poetic justice at its finest. But the real cherry on top came during the town's celebration a month later. Julian had come up with the idea for the riparian rights revival, a small fair with tables under canvas, tents, local bands playing, and food that actually tasted like it came from the land. It wasn't flashy, just a proper Wyoming gathering. As the sun set over the hills, I stood up on a wooden crate by the cattle barn, looking out at the familiar faces that had once doubted me. I didn't have to say her name. Everyone knew who I was talking about when I said, and if someone hands you a $3 million check for rainwater, maybe hand it back with a shovel and ask where they were when the sandbags were going down. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Even the most hardened faces cracked a smile. There was no more anger, no more suspicion, just peace. And for the first time in months, it felt like everything was finally right. Julian grilled ribs. Mara drank lemonade, and Harold showed up wearing a Hawaiian shirt, his first real sign of peace after all the years of fighting with the HOA. Even a few of Karen's former allies had come to show support, some offering apologies, others simply nodding in acknowledgement. We didn't talk about Karen that day. We didn't need to. Her story was over. Ours, however, was just beginning. The air was crisp, the kind of Wyoming morning that wakes up your bones. I climbed into the tractor, started the engine, and drove out to the east field. For the first time in weeks, there was silence. No banners, no letters, no Lexus creeping up my driveway. Just me, the land, and Ash Creek whispering like she always had, free and unbothered. And that was enough for me.